it out. Okay. Hi, everybody. And if you want to put your who you are in the chat, please do. And Claudia will be following the chat. You have come to one of the meetings of what we call Ballot Forward, the people in California who want to learn more about putting measures for children and youth on the ballot. And I'm Margaret Brodkin, the founder and director of Funding the Next Generation, which is sponsoring this. And this particular meeting is about building strategic alliances for political campaigns, making yourself a political powerhouse through the alliances that you develop. And so I am going to do a sort of overview of my insights about this. And then Nicole Derse is the founder and co-principal or co-founder and one of the two principals of 50+1 Strategies. And Nicole Serrano is a campaign strategist with 50+1 Strategies. Then Christina, who is here, who ran 2 campaigns in San Joaquin County, is going to share what her experience was with this. And Sonia Kohler who was a member of the kitchen cabinet of the Monterey campaign, will share her experience. And hopefully we will make it through this. So I am going to start now with sort of why we're doing this. And we're doing this very far out from some of the campaigns that people are, considering doing, because building your network and your coalition for whether it's a ballot measure or a political campaign to get more money on the ballot is different from what people who are coming to this normally do. And what I have seen is that it's where people sort of underestimate what's involved in this, underestimate how long it takes to do this, and fall short sometimes in their campaigns because of that. So, my 3 guidelines here are like, start now building the kind of alliances and coalition that you need, especially as you do sort of the incremental steps towards getting to the ballot or mounting a major sort of local budget campaign. Because the last thing we want, and this has happened to a lot of people, is people don't know you exist until you start a campaign. We do not want that to happen. And the other thing that happens is that we all love talking to each other. We do it all the time. We know everybody in our field, and we talk about how to make things better. And so we're going to talk today about how to make new friends and not to spend all your time with the usual suspects, because that's what serves you well in becoming a political powerhouse. And the other sort of guideline that I think is important is focusing on people who can provide concrete help to you. And I'll go through what I think concrete help is, but you can spend a lot of time sort of cultivating and nurturing people who are, some organizations come to mind, and maybe it's not appropriate to say what they are, but who in the long run are happy to put their name or not on a list of supporters, but doing something concrete for your efforts is not on their radar. So the theory here is that it's easy to engage people in a campaign if you're already connected to them and have some kind of relationship with them. And it's particularly easier to neutralize the opposition. And you can hear what happened in Monterey around that, neutralizing the opposition. If they know you, if they don't hate you, if they don't have stereotypes about who you are. So what I want to go through here is what kind of help do you need to become a political powerhouse? Um, and you need, allies and individuals with one of the following three qualities. You want to align yourself, get to know, become part of people with political influence. And that can be organizations primarily, but it can also be individuals. So it is important, as the next phase of this meeting is sort of how to do power mapping, how to figure out who's got the power to help you get something done. And it can be the mayor's wife. It can be, it can be a real well-known civic organization, and we can go through in a minute who some of those groups are. And we've made some mistakes along the way in various campaigns by not connecting early enough to the organizations with political influence. You also want to think about who's got the resources to help, not insignificantly, who's got money, because engaging early on with people that you're ultimately see as being able to provide money for this. And that's sometimes individuals who, you consider are going to make major donations to this. And I have to say, I wish we had more experience so far with, where some of the money is. The generally what I've seen is unions have money and hospitals have money. And those are two organizations that have helped various campaigns along the way. And there is a whole slew of children's funding measures that have gotten passed in the state of Missouri that got passed because, hospitals were one of the co-leads and actually paid for the campaigns. I would say when, Alameda campaign joined forces with the pediatric hospital, they were able to have the money to collect signatures. People have space, people have muscle. I remember sitting around a table and saying, what are these, the Teamsters Union? What are they doing here? Well, they turned out to have a lot of muscle, i.e., taking down all the signs that the anti-taxers put up and being able to put up signs and stuff. So I put muscle in there. And then there are people who have restaurants who can donate and who can donate food and wine for all the many events that you're going to want to have. And as important, maybe just as important as the organizations and people with political influence are the organizations that get on the street and have volunteers who can actually do the legwork for your efforts. I remember the first campaign I ran, and a member of our staff was deeply invested in the Green Party. Well, it was somewhat different than it is now, but those guys knew how to walk precincts and knock on the doors. And when I had a meeting for all the 25 youth employment agencies that were going to sort of get out there and collect signatures, 2 people showed up. So, understanding who's used to the political arena is like really important. So some of the outreach strategies, and this comes as no surprise to people, that you will think about doing or making presentations at meetings, going to the Chamber of Commerce, going to the Kiwanis Club, going to the rallies that other organizations are having. If somebody invites you to speak at a class on public policy, you never know who's going to be in that class, who's going to add something to what you're doing. The other thing is, it doesn't have to always be inviting some of the people we're talking about to events that we do. So they feel respected and trusted by us to be speakers. The people in Yola were always, they would have a annual children's meeting, always business people were speakers. Not the only speakers, but they always let leaders in the business community know they respected and cared about what they thought about. Another thing people do in terms of outreach and making friends and getting allies is joining other people's campaign. In San Diego, they're considering like, okay, what can we do to support the library campaign or the housing campaign or a campaign for transportation. These are all things that we should consider. And the other thing is I want to say is if you have a network and you look out and say, oh my God, none of these people are political powerhouses, you would be really surprised about who knows who, went to school with so-and-so, has a kid in kindergarten with somebody on the board of supervisors, et cetera. So I'm for really pushing your network to think expansively. I do have some tips here that I can't read on my screen, that it's important. I think I spoke about business, about honestly, law enforcement can become the opposition, but if you are close with one or two police officers and they can sort of help fend off opposition from law enforcement, you don't have to wait till you're running a campaign to go speak at the Democratic Club for whatever, so that you are a known entity. What else is on my list there? I'll let Sonia talk about how to get in good with the anti-taxers, because that happened in Monterey and it was so amazing. Just amazing. And it was all personal and how they did it and how early they started, etc. The other thing I've seen people sort of flounder over is sort of understanding who in your network, who in your power map, et cetera, who in the people that you think you're going to rely on are actually very risk averse and are not going to help you. So I think it's important to know who falls in that category. I mean, sometimes United Way falls in that category. Sometimes they can be the most helpful organization around every community and county. It's different. So it's, it's up to us to figure out and to know early who's so risk averse that you move on to the next group of people. So I'm going to stop sharing. And so the next thing we're going to do, just so you understand the agenda, is we're going to talk about power mapping. So how you draw a map of who you want to engage in this kind of way and become part of your alliance, and who become, and as well as power mapping around the opposition and how you're going to, deal with that. And I'm going to turn to the two Nicoles from 50+1 Strategies. And then after that, we'll hear about the campaigns in San Joaquin and the campaigns in Monterey and what they did to make a really robust network of people who were their allies and supporters. So you should be able to, Nicole, I don't know how you're going to do this. You should be able to share the screen. All right.
Okay, great. Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can everybody?
Okay, great. Fabulous. Thank you. I'm on my phone because all of a sudden my computer just stopped working on Zoom. So I'm glad that it can make it work. Anyway, I'm super psyched to talk with you all. It's great to see so many familiar faces. And I was just curious, like maybe people could put in the chat how familiar you are with power mapping. I imagine this is one of the tools that you have done either in your organizations currently as you've looked at legislative advocacy or at other organizations that you've worked with. So I I see Aaron in the chat. Would love to hear anyone else that has done power mapping before, and maybe in what context. If you could share that, that would be awesome. If you are new to it, that's exciting too. Excited to introduce you to some folks. So power mapping has really been an amazing tool for folks that are doing advocacy work to really understand like kind of the levers of power in the community. So there's traditional levers of power as we think about elected officials, big donors. And then there's also levers of power that maybe we don't think about as directly, right? In terms of folks that have really deep relationships in the community, that have access to a lot of potential volunteers, or people that just have a lot of influence as community leaders, as civic leaders, et cetera. So today we're going to think about it in the context of ballot measure campaigns, because I will say that there's certainly overlap between who tends to have power in ballot measure campaign and who tends to have power in our communities across the board. But they're not always the same, right? There's some organizations, say a big church, that may have a lot of influence in your community if you're looking at a advocacy tool or a community event, but are less likely to get involved in a ballot measure campaign. So we want to be kind of thinking about this in the context of ballot measure campaigns. Who has the power to help us win, or frankly, who has the power to help us lose, right? And when we say that, what are the things we're looking at for these ballot measures? One is resources, money, okay? Who's got money to help our campaign on the yes side? Who's got money on the no side that's going to go against us? Then there's also influence. Who is really taken as a credible voice on these issues? They're not going to bring money. They're not going to bring people, but their voice matters, right? Newspapers are a really good example of this. Maybe an elected official who is just widely respected in your community. We saw that in Sacramento. Who has the people power to be able to actually get folks to turn out for or against our measures? This is something that we've really got on our side in a lot of ways, and we really need to be able to leverage to be powerful. And then the second piece of this is who's invested in our success. We'll get into this in a little bit, but just coming on board and saying, I support, yes on Measure L, fund for, after school programs. It's one thing to say, put my name on that flyer, and it's another thing to actually do something to help win. So we're really interested most in that overlap, right? Who has the power, but also who is invested in our success. Again, this is the same thing for the other side. Who's invested in helping us and trying to make sure that we lose, right? So we'll get into who all these various pieces are, but when we think about power analysis and power mapping, we're going to look at people on an X and a Y scale and plot them in our communities. Next slide. So this is what a power map actually looks like. We got this from Wellstone, but there's really a lot of good resources on this, but it's kind of the same. No matter what you look at, it's basically the same idea. So on the X-axis, what you want to do is plot out folks on their support level. So how much do they care about this, right? Furthest to the left is diehard support, right? These are the organizations, the individuals who this is their top priority, right? This is going to be your first 5 commissions. This is going to be, your child advocacy groups. This is going to be maybe one elected official who's really making this their top issue, right? Who really, 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 really cares about this? And then you have people on that support axis all the way down. Active support. Maybe the Democratic Party comes out in favor, and maybe they're going to send a mail piece, to 100,000 voters in your community. That's active support, right? It's not diehard support, because when they're knocking on doors, they're probably not talking about your measure at the top of their script, but it's active support. Then there's the inclined towards, right? These are the organizations or the individuals who are either, yes, I support you, but I'm not going to really do anything. You can use my name, or, yeah, I think I support you, but I'm not going to take a yes position, right? So when we think about ballot measures, it's actually like somewhere in between active support and inclined towards, of just those people that say, yes, our organizations, yes, I'm with you, but I'm not going to donate money. I'm not going to come out and bring volunteers. I'm not going to send out a special newsletter. I'm not going to post on Facebook or Twitter about this, right? So that whole support in terms of the x-axis, right, that the first left side of this, there's a whole spectrum. And so our job here is to think about where do people fall on that spectrum. The right side of it are, that marker right in the middle is completely neutral. Not going to take a position and not going to say anything one way or the other. Maybe you'll have organizations who just don't see it as especially relevant. Maybe they're just focused on environmental issues, or they're just focused on housing issues. We know that issues of children and youth affect all of these things, but maybe they don't see it that way. It's neutral. They're not really going to take a position one way or the other. And then you've got the folks that are opposition, inclined against. Maybe they're going to say something publicly against you. Maybe they're just quietly no, but they're not going to be putting a lot of resources on it, but they are opposed to the measure. Active against. Okay, we're going to send out a newsletter telling people, from the realtors why we're against this, or we're going to put out a mailer where the Republican Party and we're taking a no position against this. Then you got diehard against. Those are the organizations or the individuals who it is their priority to stop this from happening. The tax organizations, right? These tax groups are often that. The police officers union in some instances, because they don't want you using a set aside to take away their revenue for their budgets, right? So think about where people fall on this axis. Some of it you're already going to know. Some of it you're going to have to go through the process of having these endorsement conversations, talking to them about your measure. You want to try to move people further on the left axis as much as you possibly can, but you also have to be realistic about everyone has their own priorities, self-interest, goals, etc. Now let's talk about the y-axis, right? Now, this is where we really look at mapping how much influence and power people have over a ballot measure specifically, right? So that is really like how much are they doing, and what influence do they have in terms of ballot measures specifically? They may not be on the radar, right? When we go into the bottom of this one, that's where we're talking about folks who are never going to take a position on a ballot measure campaign and never going to be involved, right? I mentioned churches, 501c3s, they get nervous about it. We know that there's a lot more they can do. That's another training, right? Is Alliance for Justice, and how much we know that those folks can do. But when it comes to taking positions on ballot measures, it's not something they generally do. And then as we go up the y-axis here, we get into can get attention, taking into account. These are people, organizations where maybe they don't often get involved in ballot measures, but they can, right? This could be like civic organizations. This could be community leaders, right? As we get further up the axis on the Y, up that ladder, we're talking about organizations or individuals who are often involved in ballot measures and have a lot of power there. What is the power? The power is resources, money, influence, or volunteers and people, right? Excuse me. As we get further up there, we're talking about political parties. We're talking about elected officials. We're talking about labor unions. We're talking about donors, foundations, individual donors who often get involved in ballot measure campaigns. Sometimes you've got like a 501c4 of community organizations that have pooled their resources and figured out how to do that, and they do take positions. Statewide, there's a group called California Calls that does that, and there's some local manifestations of that. So what you want to do is actually look in your community about where does everyone fall on these axes. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about who some of these powerful actors could be. I mentioned this already, but one is the county Democratic Republican Party. Labor unions, they are not monolithic. We all know this, but it's really important to say and to look at what labor unions in your communities have spent money on ballot measures. Just a few here. SEIU, right? They can be on our side in terms of these ballot measure campaigns. They have been in many places. They're representing healthcare workers. Often they're representing childcare workers. We also want to look getting into the ones that are further with us, potentially on the x-axis, the teachers unions, the members of CTA, of CFT, the nurses, right? Members of California Nurses Association. We know that nurses and teachers are amazing validators for our work, right? Also doctors, but thinking about those labor unions, we know they have influence, we know they have money, we know they have people. They're super important here and really way up high on that 10 axis. And you want to get them as furthest to the left in terms of your support as you possibly can. Then we got the unions that we know have fought us in the past. Firefighters, police officers, deputy sheriffs, those law enforcement unions. We'll hear from folks in Monterey about this, but what can you do to neutralize them? Try everything you possibly can to either get them on your side or most likely scenario, get them to neutral, right? We know they have power. We know they're high up on that y-axis. They often give money to for or against ballot measures. Elected officials, there's so many of them, right? You want to look at, first of all, what elected officials are going to do something for you. Can you prioritize those elected officials that are going to make this a priority, that are going to get on the phone and ask for money, that are going to be out there, doing op-eds for you, that are going to be out there really trying to do everything they can to organize other people in support. An elected official that just says, use my name, okay, that's fine, but that's going to be pretty low in terms of the influence, right? Even if they're active supporter. So we want to try to figure out how to get the most out of them as we possibly can. The other thing that's cool with elected officials and anything is showing that broad diversity, that kind of everyone agrees, we all agree this is the right way to go. If they're unlikely to usually to be on the same side, that's really good too. The next thing is media outlets. This is a place where I think we really have a big advantage getting that earned media. They're doing a great job of it right now in Sonoma. I just saw a great newspaper article that they had on their signature gathering. Using earned media opportunities for free is really great. And then those endorsements, getting that newspaper endorsement and working that and trying to think about how to get them involved in the campaign and invite them to things before that, because that doesn't cost anything. And in some communities, it can be pretty significant. Faith-based leader, just because you might not get a church or a synagogue or a mosque to support, you can still get leaders as individuals. Donors, foundations, we all know how critical that is, right? We know how important they are in the power access. So getting them to support and, having friends like Heising Simons here and others is so critical in terms of mapping who those are in your community. Business groups, we know that they often have a lot of power. That looks different in every community. Your Chamber of Commerce is going to be different. Maybe ag is important in your community. Maybe the hospitals. What businesses play a role? Cannabis industry. Where do they fall here? How can you get them as furthest to the left as possible? Because we know that they're going to be influential. State or national groups focused on children and youth. We know that these are diehard support. So which of these groups or foundations, et cetera, can we get to care about these local communities? Margaret's a huge advocate here. Children's Funding Project is also really helpful here. So thinking about how to utilize those to bring in some resources. Political PACs, they exist pro and con on our issues. They've got power in the communities. Some of them are really small. Some of them are really big. Some of them are super transparent about what they're fighting for. Some are not. Figure out who they are. Look at previous ballot measures and who's played a role in these things in the past. And then finally, civic organizations, right? We're talking about groups that are targeted in specific racial and ethnic communities, NAACP, CHIRLA, UNIDOS, API groups, figure out which of those are important in your community. Some of them are taking positions on ballot measures already, and a lot of them can. Sometimes we just need to ask and make the case sooner than later. Start those conversations now, even if you're at 2026, because we know that we can get a lot of these groups to endorse, even if they haven't yet, because they've got the power in their community and the influence. They just haven't used it for ballot measures yet. Next slide. And then finally, just a few things to consider here. One is support does not equal help. It's not the same. And I think you'll hear from this when you hear from Monterey and San Joaquin. it's fine for people to say, yes, I support you, but you've got to be really specific. And that's my third point here about what you're asking of them. Get as much as you possibly can out of them. Will you raise money? Will you host a fundraiser? Will you come to a fundraiser and speak? Will you help us get additional endorsements? Meaning, will you talk to the labor unions that support you about why this matters? Will you help us get volunteers? And not just in general, but will you take on a phone bank, once a week for the last 6 weeks? Will you show up at, 3 canvases 2 months before the election so that we know we can count on you to help drive out volunteers, right? You got to get really specific. And I know most of you are still a couple years away from these ballot measures, but be thinking now about this. Don't even ask for people's support until you're specific about this is what I'm looking for, because once they say yes, they're like, oh, I'm already a supportive. And you're like, yeah, but this is what I really need from you. So think about that early. Be on the lookout for opportunities to leverage self-interest. What do they already care about? Margaret mentioned the hospitals, but how can you, as you all are still in the early stages of this, if you're drafting these measures, can you do something to help SEIU? Can you do something to help, the healthcare workers? Can you do something to help folks that are paraprofessionals? Think about what you can do that is going to get them on board now. And maybe they have a ballot measure that they need your help on. Can you kind of decide to help each other out on a housing ballot measure, and they'll help you on the child advocacy? Think about that early. I want to say, make sure this is kind of feels a little negative, but it's kind of important. Assume the status quo is going to come after you. What I mean by that is assume they want to keep things the way they are. The police and the fire do not want to give up. Unions do not want to give up a portion of their general fund, right? The taxpayer associations do not want to see taxes increase. Elected officials don't want to often see tax increases or don't want to give up their power. So don't assume that everyone is going to be as nice as you are, because most of you are coming from this, all of you, from such a place of genuine care about your communities and the kids. And we know that others may not be as nice as you are, and they may manipulate or misrepresent and do what they can to sabotage you. Be realistic about how much you can move people. We want to try, but people and organizations, they have their own priorities, and we're not going to be able to fundamentally shift that. But we need to get them to see how, regardless of what they care about, kids are so core to that they are so core to all these other issues, and work on that in the early stages. And then the most important thing, we want to get our supporters as engaged and active as possible. Regardless, the most important thing is to get rid of any organized opposition. Any opposition that has power, resources, influence, and money is the most important goal. And we got to do that early. So just a few thoughts, and I'll turn it over to Nicole to let's have a little bit of a discussion before we hear from the others.
I want to adjust things a little bit, and I've chatted with Nicole and it's fine with her. So if we could, I want to turn to our examples, to make sure that we have time for that, and then go back to the exercise that we want to do. So I'd first like to turn to Christina to sort of help this come alive. And I want to make one point here, which is that most people on this screen are not doing ballot measures in the near future. So I want to sort of point out what I said in the chat, which is you build this over time, and it takes time to do this. And it is not too early to start thinking about this now and figure out who you need to be reaching out to. And I have had the privilege of sort of being part of and helping the childcare community in San Francisco become a truly political powerhouse. And it's taken decades. And it isn't like you do it once and then you have a campaign, then you do it. It's an ongoing process of being a political powerhouse and being able to go to your board of supervisors or your city council and, and put a measure on the ballot. So that just that's what we're talking about here. So Christina, tell us what happened in San Joaquin County.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone, it's great to be here with you today. I'm with the San Joaquin Children's Alliance in San Joaquin County, and we have put 2 ballot measures on. The nature of our charter, our county charter, is that we had to have the 2/3 majority because of the council, how the supervisors put it on the ballot. So we missed, but at a pretty high rate. We got like 61.4% the first time around and 63.5% the second time around. And our initiative was to tax cannabis and give 50% of that to children and youth through prescripted programming that we had lined out. So I will tell you just a couple quick things that we learned, and it was so funny. I'm listening to Nicole. I can't tell you, every time Nicole speaks, lean in and take lots of notes. She has steered us so well. And we learned so much that a lot of the things I was going to share here today, I realized I'm sharing back a lot of the words that she ingrained in our heads. So let me give you some real life stories to some of the very important points that she shared. I will tell you one thing I would add right off the top is expect the unexpected. Campaigns are the wildest ride I think I've ever been on. I'm the mother of 4 boys, so hold on. Our very first campaign manager, who was selected by our elected champion, we believe, it's not like I could ever prove this, that he was sent to make sure we didn't succeed. And I would have never seen that coming. It was a body blow that I could have never anticipated. But politics is messy, and we learned from it and didn't let that hold us back, and we went back. Something else we've learned, especially when you're looking at a ballot measure, is it helps to have multiple elected officials endorse and support, but not all those elected officials like each other. So it becomes an interesting part-time job trying to manage those impacts, but it was still very important. We had 2 supervisors who basically were at war the entire time they were at the dais together. But we got both to endorse, but we had to be very careful how we used their endorsements, that they didn't ever, walk past each other on the sidewalk kind of things, that we targeted all of our social media. But you can get, it was really important. One was a diehard Republican, one was a diehard Democrat, but we got multiple of each to endorse, but we had to be very careful how we used it and just manage those relationships appropriately. Understand the political implications when you go to your elected officials, and as Nicole said, be really specific with your ask. Be really realistic. Look for the leverage that they will be considering when you're tailoring that ask. We really hoped that our elected official would help us fundraise. She was our champion, but she was also running for re-election that year. And so they really have to have these considerations when you look at who you're asking to endorse and what you're specifically asking for them to help, is that she had to raise money for her own campaign, which meant that was obviously top of mind for her, and that reduced her ability to help us. In order to neutralize opposition the second time around, we actually hired a campaign manager that was considered a friend of our opposition. Perfectly capable campaign manager, was going to do some very basic things, but what that did for us was it put the kibosh on the people who wanted to make noise for us, including an online media outlet who, for whatever reason, decided to come out against us pretty hard the first time around. The second time around, because of the campaign manager we hired, they did not come out until 9 o'clock the night before. And it was at the very bottom of their list, and it just said, on X, vote no, period. There was no reason, there was no nothing. It was 9 o'clock the night before. There was very limited people that were going to see it, and that really did help us quite a bit. The Farm Bureau was against this the first time around, and part of that was because of the nature of cannabis and the policy. They were protecting the large part of our economy, which is ag. We appreciated that. So we went and found allies of both us and friends of theirs. We educated them and sent them, and it never completely went away. They definitely didn't endorse, but it definitely brought the temperature down, and that was really, really helpful. So a couple of things about what Nicole talks about in power mapping was money was a really big problem for us, and we figured that out very quickly. Cannabis, when we went the first time, it was still the third rail. Everybody was going to vote. Nobody really cared, but they sure as heck weren't going to have their money show up on a campaign donations list from their organization or their company. But what we found we had a lot of was influence and people power. So we really leaned in heavily to kind of that trusted message bearer model. And we mapped out everyone who had power with large spheres of influence. So we leaned in really heavily to our CBOs. Many of them got their boards to be fine with them being very vocal and pressed out a lot of our messaging through their social media, recruited a lot of help for us in terms of text banking, phone banking, walking, anything like that. And that was huge, especially when we were trying to get into communities that we found it difficult to communicate to. We identified what part of the population that was, and then we identified who their trusted message bearer was. We went to them, converted them, and then gave them everything they needed to be vocal for us in social media and in their meetings. And that really did help a lot as well. In terms of labor, we have a really active SEIU local chapter here, and there really wasn't this huge intersection in our work, but funny thing is, again, just be ready to take advantage of every opportunity, and that we were there to come before the Board of Supervisors advocating for this. We had signs and people and cute kids and all the things. And I had been working with him for months and months and months. And he sees everyone there and he looks at me and goes, all right, what is it you need from me? I said, I just need you to stand up with us and hold this sign. And he said, done. And we got a picture. He had his SEI shirt on. He had our sign in his hand. And he was perfectly happy with us putting it out everywhere. So you just have to be creative sometimes and also ready to pivot. I found that the 4 really most important things were that build relationship early and often, listen very clearly for what their needs are, look for intersection of needs, and then ask for something specific. Does that sound like something you might have just heard? I think maybe you just heard that. So I'm just here to let you know that's the Bible and it works. But I have to agree with Margaret. You have to start early. And I think it's to some degree, some of what I've just shared with you is probably interesting stories that I hope you retain. But really what I would love to impress upon you is, we went to ballot for the first time in 2018, but this work started in 2015. And a lot of it was about building that momentum, building those relationships early around meaningful meetings that had small wins that helped build trust and relationships so that when it was time, everybody was ready to go. And the thing that was so amazing about all of this as well is we lost at ballot both times, but when we lost in 20, and all of a sudden, here comes all of the CARES Act funding and all of the ARPA funding, we were already organized so that even though we even had to do everything online and remotely because of COVID restrictions, we were able to successfully lobby for 5 specific proposals in 21 and 22, the board to invest that funding in to mitigate the impacts of COVID on the children and families of San Joaquin County. So, there's a lot of different strategies for how to do that for us. We lobbied in front of the Board of Supervisors to create a Children and Youth Task Force. And then we worked really hard to identify meaningful work that task force could do together. And then we looked for every opportunity for how that would use us to create the drumbeat. Like Margaret says, lots of time. But honestly, it was just that authentic, genuine engagement over time, building relationship, being ready for what could happen at any given moment. Because you couldn't have told me in 2019 that COVID would have been coming, and then all of a sudden millions would be pouring into our communities, but we were organized. So that's that. I'm happy to answer any questions, but mostly just thrilled to be with you all today.
Thank you, Christina. And I'm going to move on to Sonia from Monterey. Sonia, are you there? Can you unmute yourself? And tell us. So while she's talking at first, I was asked to show you the page on their website, which is still up, that has all the endorsers on it. So while you're talking, I'm going to see if I can pull that off. So you get a feeling for the scope of people that they reached out to and put into their network.
Wonderful. Margaret, and I'm going to do a quick time check just to confirm.
Yeah, we're running out of time. So
right. So I'm going to get right to the nugget of the story, which has already been previewed. So good afternoon. I'm Sonia Kohler. I was on the cabinet for Measure Q in Monterey County that did not pass. I don't use the word fail because I believe we build a very strong base that sets us up for 2026 or whichever date we choose to go moving forward. And you've heard a lot about building a broad network. As you see with the list in front of you, that we had a broad network. We had a deep network where we attempted to think ahead was where our opposition is. And that was only by chance. It was not strategic that we thought that way. It was because folks in our network said, you need to do it. The context was during Bright Beginning. So in addition to being on the cabinet, I have been a consultant in the community, working in early childhood, youth, all a broad swath of issues. Building coalitions is one of my specialties. And I'm also part of the early learning or early childhood development network in Monterey County. So coming with, just so you know who I am and what I came to the table with. And as part of Bright Beginnings Early Childhood Development Initiative, there was a strategy around family-friendly businesses. And so we had, over the years, been building a network within the business community. The logos you see here represent a lot of those relationships. And we had been, pre-COVID and then in COVID, been building our relationships within the chambers. And as COVID hit, you all know childcare rose to the top. Like all of a sudden, everyone realized childcare, we need it. We never thought about it before. We just thought you guys were there. So we had this perfect moment attending chambers, and we were building our cabinet. And one of our champions was from the chamber. And he happened to also be part of the Taxpayers Association. And so he gave us the insight, you need to work on your opposition. In addition to taxpayers, we had realtors, and we were considering, we had ag and hospitality because they're related to, it was a parcel tax measure. So we knew there would be opposition and other opposition as well. But in the taxpayers, we had the luck of our cabinet member who could really lean on his influence within that arena. We also had other folks who would tend to be more conservative, who could also participate in that. And really, I'm thinking about it, I'm an introvert, which isn't a natural skill or characteristic for coalition building. But what you have to do with your opposition is something, leveraging your introvertness, is you go deep. You really want to understand your opposition. What is it that they're against? And be able to address those issues and spend the time with them. And that's something I know as an introvert I love to do. I love to go deep, and I love to understand who I'm talking to. So spend the time understanding your opposition, find your ally, and really build an authentic relationship with them. We manage to neutralize. There's always potential to go to a supporter at the end. So that's my short spiel. Margaret, if you want me to point out to anything else in particular, please, you can ask me that question.
You're not the only place where agriculture is a major player and has the capacity to raise a lot of money. How'd you deal with that?
How'd we deal with that? Great question. We leaned on our networks within the cabinet. We had many folks who had connections to agriculture. We included agriculture from the beginning in drafting our measure. We made sure that we drafted something that they could be okay with. And so those were two of the tactics. Number three, during COVID, we were advocating for ARPA funding. And while they weren't part of that, the team of groups advocating for funding for childcare, they on their own were advocating for childcare in a different way than we were. So we knew we already had built relationships through that. So not only relationships with the cabinet, relationships on raising funds, and then including them early on in the discussions in developing the ballot measure. Okay. We actually had an exemption, a small exemption for some agriculture land, not everything owned by agriculture, specifically land that was used for production, for growing our food. And so not things like offices and things like that. So that was one way we were able to bring them on board and advocate.
Yes, big compromise. So
big compromise, not 100% compromise.
Yeah, but not 100%. Nicole Serrano, shall we sort of end this with a sort of quick and dirty shout out about you want to put up the
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes, I'll do that now. Hi, everyone. And thank you, Sonia and Christina, for those great examples. As we talked about more and heard from them, obviously power mapping and really understanding your relationships is incredibly important. So just very quickly, the next 5 minutes, love to kind of just do a quick exercise with everyone, because our networks and our communities are a lot bigger than we realize. So would love to hear from folks as we do this. Just unmute or put in the chat. We're going to just think about our own networks and even within our own communities. So first, we'd love to think through who are the people in your community who are really influential and have a lot of power and popular that you think are going to support you if you were to go and do this. And just feel free to unmute or put in the chat.
Yeah, feel free to shout out.
Yeah.
It can be organizations, entities, or individuals.
Could be your local mayor. I know that my local Dem Club has like a women's caucus that are really passionate about children's work and really just kind of put in the work and organize and help petition around. So that would be kind of one that would fall in that category. Christina with cannabis attorney who rallied cannabis company support. That's awesome. Orgs with common missions. Yes. Local Empowerment Congress. Yes. Early childhood network providers. Totally. So as we're kind of thinking through this and kind of getting the juices going, what's like the total opposite of that? Who are the folks who, of course, League of Women Voters. It's probably a lot more broader than you think it is. So we'll just take some time, just a couple minutes after this. But as we kind of think about the total opposite, if we think about this X and Y axis, who are the folks who are very, very powerful and popular that are probably going to be diehard against, probably that you don't want to use any of your valuable time talking to or engaging with? I know Nicole mentioned a couple on the offset. These are probably anti-tax organizations. Maybe it's a police union. Folks have any examples in their community? Or Christina and Sonia, if you want to talk about more about those folks from your own experience.
We had an experience in Richmond, which, ended up causing 3 different ballot measures, and it was SEIU. And SEIU is very powerful in some places and not at all in others. I don't think that maybe. And the measure went forward without them being participating in the writing. And the words for what they did are probably not appropriate to say here. They had a shit fit about it, frankly, and had to go back to the drawing boards, rewrite a measure, come up with a different tax, etc. So that's an example of a failure to actually understand who the opposition is. And my experience is that children's people think everybody's for them and doesn't understand that there can be when you talk about money, there's opposition. What else we got here?
Thanks, Margaret, for sharing.
I can add with the Taxpayers Association, there was a slippery edge. In our ballot measure, the first 5 was the recipient of the funds, which is used to managing, stewarding public funds. So that had both a positive effect, knowing there was experience in that, but it was also a negative because it could open up. The Taxpayers Association never messed, that we weren't on their radar. And so all of a sudden getting attention could also mean, oh, that might be negative attention. So just to understand some of those nuances as well. Some
and
things
you think they may not be there. In Marin, they were totally unprepared for, in the last couple of weeks of the campaign, the taxpayers, to put signs, put signs near every freeway exit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it had a huge impact because of our naivete about, the strength of potential opposition. So I see that our time is approaching being up. Is there anybody who'd like to shout out any insights about who's in the middle of this, who they want to be on their side, who they think, oh my God, I'm going to go out to outreach and make a presentation to the Democratic Club. Just start early with them understanding issues. Any thoughts about people on your side, people you want to keep on your side? Hi, Marin. I hope I described that adequately, Michelle, or a shortened version. And my favorite is always the fire department. So I don't know, Claudia, if you want to add something to this. They decided to oppose the Sacramento measure, and it became a major thing. And Claudia, go.
Oh, just quickly, as many of you know, we went to the ballot 3 times. First 2 times, both police and fire opposed the measure. They were set-asides of, well, the first one was a cannabis tax. The second one was a set-aside. And the third time, we approached this differently, as many people have talked about, understanding what their needs and interests were, and went straight at the fire department, the fire union, to explain to them, we were creating a children's fund. This could benefit you because we wrote into the ballot measure, which Christina, I think, mentioned, wrote into the ballot measure that city departments could also get some of the new money in the children's fund. And then we sold it to the fire department as, this means your youth academies could get more. And for the police, your youth academies can apply for more money. So it was that, plus I think something that's not talked about as much, if you're doing a children's fund or any ballot measure, creating the baseline, the children's baseline, which is preserves the current general fund spending on children and youth, is really about preserving union jobs as well. So you could spin it that way. There's more, but I'll leave it at that.
And I want to just call out what September wrote in, which is the importance of community foundations. They can actually give money to campaigns, and almost everybody on this screen has a community foundation that is overseas, or they're where they are part of what the community foundation does. They can be very reluctant but helpful, and starting to nurture them and understand